Welcome to Roger That, a podcast presented by HVAF of Indiana. I'm your host, Lauren Carpenter, and join me as we discuss how HVAF is ending veteran homelessness and how you can join us in our mission. We'll be having conversations with community partners, staff members, and even some of the veterans we serve. We hope sharing more of our story with supporters like you can shine a light and give a voice to this vulnerable population, because no hero should ever be homeless. All right, we have a great episode today with 2 interviews, but before we dive in, here are some stats we'd like to share that show how we served Hoosier Heroes in Central Indiana in July. So last month, we provided temporary housing for 106 veterans and provided emergency and permanent housing for 205 veterans. We provided essential items to 254 veterans through our food, hygiene, and clothing pantry. Our employment specialists helped 16 veterans get hired and receive the opportunity for a good and promising career. 17 veterans received legal services thanks to our partnership with Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. So far this year, we have served 1,035 veterans, and we know we couldn't serve this many Hoosier Heroes without your support. So thank you for donating, volunteering, following us on social media, and listening to this podcast. To find out more about how we serve homeless and at-risk veterans as well as their families, head to hvaf.org. On today's episode of Roger That, I am excited to introduce to you one of our partners, the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, also known as NCHV. NCHV is the leading authority on homeless veterans issues, and it's the only national organization solely focused on ending veteran homelessness. They work to achieve their mission by promoting collaboration, shaping policy, building service capacity, ensuring accountability, and managing a referral helpline for veterans experiencing and are at risk of homelessness. In this episode, you're going to hear from NCHV CEO Kathryn Monet and former NCHV Board Chair and HVAF Board Emeritus, Steve Benz. As CEO of NCHV, Kathryn focuses on the execution of NCHV's strategic policy and technical assistance agenda and on expanding NCHV's strategic partnerships to more effectively end veteran homelessness. Kathryn has spent over a decade in the public and nonprofit sector working to address housing instability and homelessness among veterans. Prior to joining NCHV, she was with the National Alliance to End Homelessness, focusing on the promotion of data-driven, evidence-based interventions to end homelessness, particularly among veterans. Kathryn also was involved in veteran homelessness in a legislative capacity during her time at the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. Kathryn currently serves on the VA Advisory Committee for Homeless Veterans, the U.S. Vets DC Advisory Council, the Board of Directors for the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, and the Board of Governors for the National Housing Conference. Steve's relationship with HVAF goes all the way back to 2002. Eli Lilly and Company had provided a grant to HVAF, and as one of the company's lawyers at the time, he worked on the paperwork for that grant. From that assignment, he learned more about HVAF and wanted to join in on the mission. Since then, he has served on HVAF's Board of Directors and even served as board chair for 6 years. He is now a Director Emeritus. In 2014, Steve joined the NCHV Board of Directors and served as their board chair from 2020 until this past June. Today, he is proud to work at Novo Nordisk as the Corporate Vice President of Legal and General Counsel. Steve also served as a captain in the United States Air Force from 1985 to 1991. All right, let's get into it. Here are my conversations with Kathryn and Steve. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining Roger That this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you today.
Yeah. I'm glad we can talk about this. And, I feel like in the last few years, we haven't been sharing a lot with our supporters, more about how we're connected with, NCHV and just I'm excited we can share more about what you guys are doing and how we're connected and how they can support you. So first, if you just want to share with us, just a little bit more about what the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans is.
Yeah, well, so the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans is a wonderful organization. I'm obviously biased, right? But, we have been around working on veteran homelessness and trying to address this issue since even before it was cool and popular to work on, right? I'm going to give you kind of the nutshell of our origin story because I think it matters in terms of where we started and how we got to doing what we do. We were started in 1990 by a group of Vietnam veterans who at the time were at a conference for the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, right? That's the Department of Labor program that provides employment services to veterans. And at that time, that program was, very tiny. I think they said it was around a $5 million program, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of the only dedicated types of assistance that was available to veterans experiencing homelessness. And so what they told us is that, at that time, veterans were really getting the runaround. Like they were very overrepresented in the population of people experiencing homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
They'd go to shelters and shelters would kind of be like, well, you're a veteran, like, doesn't VA have anything for you? And they go to VA and like, need some shots. You want to see a doctor? Great. Oh, you're homeless? Here, we got some sandwiches. Go down the street to the local shelter. And they'd sort of ping pong back and forth in an unproductive way. And so this group of gentlemen who were working at shelters and organizations across the country decided that they wanted to get together and do something to change that, right? And that's really what they did. They organized an entire national field of providers and sort of got everybody behind creating some dedicated assistance for veterans experiencing homelessness. And it was really timely because, at that point, the McKinney-Vento Act was like pushing through Congress. And so they were able to create, the first really dedicated programs out there that were available to homeless veterans. So I think they codified the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program. They created the Grant and Per Diem program. And, that's work that we've been doing ever since, right? When you think about the ways that the landscape of service opportunities and offerings has changed to veterans, we still engage heavily in that work in partnership with Congress, our federal partners, and providers across the country like HVAF. We also do trainings and technical assistance. So that's really designed to help providers accelerate their work and their efforts, help them understand how federal programs work, and quite frankly, how they can work the programs on behalf of the veterans they're serving, right? If we're being like really honest. And, and a number of things, right? We've recently branched out into doing some landlord engagement trainings and different types of trainings than we've done before. And I think that's been really fruitful. The other big pillar of our work is our toll-free referral line, where veterans who are facing a housing crisis call into our office and we kind of help them navigate the system of care in their community, which, as you all know, in some communities can be completely overwhelming and challenging to figure out where you can, access help, what you're actually eligible for, and how you go about getting in that front door and like getting your assessment. And so that's kind of who we are in a nutshell, our biggest pillar activities that we work on as an organization.
Yeah, how many service providers do you help throughout the country?
So that's an interesting question because so as an organization, we do have organizations we work with that are NCHV members, right? And that number is close to 200, but we work with other providers who are not NCHV members, right? Because there's a whole universe of folks out there who are all engaged in this work. And so I think the level of engagement differs depending on, whether you're a member, whether you're a provider that we have known for a really long time, like HVAF, and someone who we like know and love and trust, or whether you're someone who's kind of new and we're like, yeah, we know you're out there and we hope you're doing good work. We're going to refer a veteran to you and like, please help.
Right.
So it's different, I guess.
Yeah. Are you able to share maybe a little bit more specifically how you've been able to help us out over the years?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because our relationship with HVAF has been wonderful. I've been here at NCHV for a little over 6 years now. And I think in the time that I've been here, I've worked with 2 of your CEOs, because you've had 2 CEOs and both have been wonderful to work with. Your team has really been a resource to us here in DC as we advocate for, more resources and policy changes on behalf of our key federal programs, right? We've been working a lot with Emmy lately on some advocacy related to the grant and per diem reimbursement rate. In the middle of the pandemic, you all were really instrumental in kind of helping us think through different ways that providers could adjust their shelter services and their service offerings for veterans so that, we had some best practices that we could then push out to other communities across the country. I think our prior board chair, we actually may have, I don't want to say stolen, borrowed Steve Benz. We may have borrowed him from you all because I think he was your board chair, and our board saw the great work that he was doing there and wanted to have his leadership a little bit more than we had been in the past. And so I think we've been working with you all a great deal, and probably even more than that before I got here.
Yeah, it's cool to hear that we've been able to help each other, not just you help us, we can help you. And, and we're able to, that's something, we want people to know is, since we help veterans, we then know the topic very well of just veteran, homelessness, veteran needs, so being able to like share our knowledge, on a federal level is really cool to hear. So yeah, and you said you've been here for over 6 years, and so what led you to working for NCHV?
Ooh, a series of happy accidents. I'm over here like, how much time do you have, Lauren? Oh my goodness, my villain origin story, huh?
Yeah.
Well, so I'll be honest and say that, when I was growing up, I don't think I ever saw myself having a career in veteran services or domestic policy or anything, right? I think I had always thought that I wanted to work in the foreign policy space and do like, I don't know, international aid or something crazy like that. And that's appealing, right? But some of that work you do and you don't ever really get to see tangible results, right? It's not like working on something here where you can actually visibly see people like, oh, they're getting housing, oh, this program is growing, and you can kind of touch the issue. And so, there was a point in my career where I kind of transitioned over from international affairs to like domestic policy work, right? And I somewhat accidentally got a job at the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. And, homelessness was one of the issues in my portfolio. And I'll be honest, when I started working on this issue, I was kind of like, oh man, I got to learn some stuff. This is complicated because, the problem is very much like an onion. Like it's not just like you're operating shelters or providing housing, right? There's so much more that goes with addressing a person's needs. And so as I started to learn, what I realized was like, oh, I was thinking about my childhood and myself, right? And I don't think I fully had a word for this, but I grew up in Hawaii. Like my family was not rich at all, right? Like it was 4 of us in like a 2-bedroom house. And I slept on a couch for like the entirety of my well, maybe not my whole life, but like when I was done sharing a bed, right? And I don't think I fully grasped at the time that I was actually doubled up because like my family did not actually have money to move out into somewhere else. And it was kind of like that realization that got me thinking about like, this is actually a really important issue. And like, I got to care a lot more because they are me and I am them. And like, we could do better for people, right? Surely, at least for veterans, where we have so many resources and so much available to them. Like, why is this happening and how do we fix it? And so for me, that's kind of what led to my passion in this area. I was working in the Senate for a little while, and I think you probably well know the work-life balance and the pace there is not what it could or should be if you're someone who like has a young family and is trying to figure it out. And so I sort of looked around to figure out a way to work just on the things I care about. And veteran homelessness was the issue that kind of rose to the top amidst the variety of things that I was also working on. And so I sort of jumped out, and I jumped out at the time to work at the National Alliance to End Homelessness because they had some really great opportunities there. And I think there was a little bit of me that thought that if I stick around and work on veterans issues for much longer, like that's all I'm going to be able to do with my career. And that's okay. It's rewarding, but like there's a whole big world out there. And like, should I really limit myself? Should I try and kind of broaden my experiences a little bit more? And, then this position opened up at NCHV and I was like, oh, well, maybe I could do that. I don't know. Maybe I can't. Let me just like try and apply and see what happens. Like, what's the worst they'll say? No. And I still have this job and I'm still happy here. And so I applied for this job on a whim, literally like the night before the position opening closed. Like, oh, let's see what happens. Like, I'm just gonna send this out into the universe and hope for the best. And they ended up hiring me to do this.
Yeah, and here you are. Why why do you like still working and leading NCHV?
No, it's really rewarding work. And I know that I have a lot of peers who can't say that their work is as rewarding as mine is. Like they do a job, they don't hate their job, but they don't think about it like from morning to night. They don't have, things to look forward to, right? Like it's never like they're going to get a call from a veteran. They helped on the hotline saying, hey, I moved into my housing today. I just put together my desk. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to start looking for work. And it's those little things I think that make it meaningful, right? Or the like, oh my goodness, we just got $2 billion for veterans during COVID. And like, that's not a lot, but it is a lot, right? For like these tiny programs and the people that it can help. And I think, some of the little wins and the, I don't know, the ways that you can see the wins make an impact for people are rewarding to me and keep me going.
Yeah. So now, since you're at the federal level, can you share a little bit more about what veteran homelessness looks like just kind of across the nation?
Yeah, I absolutely can. Like, say less, Lauren. I will tell you all the things. So tell me when to stop. Okay. Well, so one of the things that we do is when we're talking about veteran homelessness, we do rely pretty heavily on HUD's point in time count. And it's not a perfect science, right? Getting to point in time count numbers. And I think you know this. I don't know if your listeners do. So I'm just going to preface this by saying,
actually, our last episode was all about the pig count. So,
so I don't have to preface it by saying anything besides that it's a little bit imperfect, but it's the best year-over-year estimate that we are able to use nationally. Okay, good. Wonderful. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, the most recent point in time count that came out was the count from 2022. And that was interesting because there were, you know, during the COVID years, not everybody counted. And so you can't make really firm apples to apples comparisons like we usually can. But I mean, there was pretty good news, right? Like on any given night, it was a little over 33,000 veterans who are homeless in this country. And when you look at the ways that the numbers have trended over the years, that's pretty good because I think the peak when we were counting under this methodology was about 74,000 in 2010. And so that's a pretty dramatic reduction, you know, over the course of a little over a decade, right? We still have a lot more work to do because 33,000 is like a heck of a lot of people, right? That's like a stadium of people, and like that's not acceptable. But you know, we're making good progress, especially when you look at the trends for some of the other subpopulations and PIC count just in general, right? Now, when you dive a little bit deeper into the numbers, right, you do see, at least in this last year in 2022, about 28% of the veterans had patterns of chronic homelessness, right? Meaning that they were either homeless for a really long time or had concurrent episodes of homelessness over the course of a couple years. So those are folks that might need a little bit more intense intervention, right, to pull them out of homelessness and into housing. There were lower numbers of families amidst the veteran population than we see in the general population, right? About 3% of veterans experiencing homelessness had families, meaning they had children, which is another challenge that I think providers have to start thinking about, right? As we see more women in the military and more younger families, right?
Yeah.
We will have to think about the makeup of our services and how we accommodate folks with children or spouses or what that looks like. But you know, homelessness looks really different, you know, in different places, right? I mean, I think a lot about the sort of urban versus rural divide, right? Where in some communities you see a lot of just visible unsheltered homelessness and encampments. And then in other communities, it's a lot more hidden and like folks living in, you know, places that aren't suitable for human habitation or different things like that. And so there's a whole lot to unpack when you think about what homelessness looks like nationally.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, something that we've been, you know, focusing a little bit more on, you know, we've seen on a local level, the racial disparity, you know, for example, in our county, Marion County, Black individuals make up over 50% of our population experiencing homelessness, but there's only 28% of the overall population. And we're partnering with our, you know, different community partners, you know, to address this issue. But, you know, I just wanted to see kind of how you've seen that maybe on a federal level.
Yeah, well, so the numbers from the PIC count, right, say that Black veterans were about 34% of veterans who were experiencing sheltered homelessness and 26% of the veterans experiencing unsheltered homelessness. But when you look at Black veterans across just the veteran population, right, they only are about 12% of all US veterans.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there is some pretty dramatic overrepresentation nationally as well. I think a lot of communities are grappling with what to do and how to bring in a stronger equity lens into, you know, their solutions and the ways that they support veterans in moving on from homelessness.
Yeah, are there any solutions that you guys are thinking through or, you know, have heard other service providers trying to do?
You know, I think in the bigger picture, we have had a couple of trainings at our annual conference on equity and race to kind of help people think about these issues differently. But I really think that for communities, right, a lot of what you need to do starts with data and talking to people, right? So understanding that you've got this dramatic overrepresentation, right? And then thinking about well, now why is that? Because that looks different from community to community. Right. And I do think that the now why is that part is really the part that gets you to the solution, right? So in some communities, it's that you've got a lot of reentry folks because they're over criminalizing certain types of issues. In other communities, it's kind of like housing market racism type issues, right? And so the solutions kind of vary based on the why is that part of the conversation. But I do think that looking at your data, really targeting your outreach and understanding of that population is instrumental, right? Because you do hear different things when you talk to diverse groups of veterans. And I mean, for us, that's something that we've been trying to do as we've been doing veteran focus groups, is trying to ensure that they're sort of very diverse and overrepresented certain populations so that we can make sure that we're capturing, different needs, because people experience things differently, right? Like they roll through a housing system or a homeless crisis response system very differently. And I mean, some of it is as simple as like, yeah, this case manager could have given me this apartment, but instead they steered me towards this neighborhood, right? I mean, I can remember even when I was buying my first house, right? Like our realtor kept showing us things that were like, not in the best neighborhoods. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Like our budget is this, but there's also like this smaller thing in a nicer neighborhood. Like, well, can you show me that? And she's like, well, I guess I could. But, and so some of it is kind of bigger picture systemic stuff, right? Some of it is thinking about what you do as an agency and how your policies perpetuate inequities or don't, right? And sort of being really progressive and thinking about your equity lens there. And then, quite frankly, the other half is individuals really doing the work, right? Like, are the people who are doing the work on veteran homelessness also doing the work on racial equity and really thinking through their own biases and kind of walking the talk to ensure that they can be fair to people. And it's a lot, right? Because it's like a whole separate problem. And it's hard to say like, yeah, you have to solve racism to solve homelessness, but you kind of do, right? Like, it's hard to do without it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, over the last 6 years you've been leading NCHV, are there any initiatives that you've led that you're just really proud that you want to share?
Ooh, initiatives that I've led. I'm like, I don't need anything. My team leads me. What are you talking about, Lauren? No, I mean, there are some really cool things that we've done. I think during COVID, we did a lot of pivoting, right? And a lot of just rethinking what we did to make it work in our new environment during the pandemic, right? And so I do think some of the changes that we were able to push Congress into creating on behalf of veterans during the pandemic were really great. And now those are things that we're kind of fighting for. We did some really cool work in partnership with the Home Depot Foundation to try to help providers and community partners understand how they could work with their state housing finance agencies to create more set-asides for veterans exiting homelessness and even people leaving homelessness, right? Amidst the low-income housing tax credit allocations to try and steer more funding towards housing programs, right? So that we actually have housing on the back end of all of the great like crisis response services that we have. And I'm trying to think about what else we've done. We've done a lot in 6 years, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
But maybe not enough if I'm struggling. I don't know. 2 is good, right? Like I can be proud of 2 things.
Right. Exactly. It's better than none, right?
Over here, like honestly, like we didn't go bankrupt. Now let me stop playing. Like, don't put that in the podcast. You can put it.
So I guess then looking ahead, what are some of your guys's like goals and plans in the next few years?
Yeah. Well, so we're in an interesting time where we've been pivoting our technical assistance and training opportunities, right? And one of the things that we did in this last year was we brought on our research fellow, and he did a lot of really great learning about the needs of aging veterans and some of the gaps that providers and communities are facing. So I think that'll probably be one of the next things that we are pushing out the door, right? Is some of the findings from his time with us and kind of some thought around what communities can do about all of this to enhance what they're doing, right? Because we are hearing from a ton of providers that, the veterans that they're serving are getting older and older and have very different needs, and that, the system of care for aging people is not really married up with the system of care for homeless people, right? And so there needs to be a little bit more interconnectivity there. We are doing some thinking about creating a learning library for not only our members, I think our members and maybe other folks too. We're still kind of figuring out the details, but I think the goal is to develop a few more self-paced online trainings that folks can take absent of like our annual conference, right? Like our annual conference is obviously the big learning training opportunity for everybody, and folks come, you know, from all around the country to sit with us for 2.5 days and hopefully not get bored, right? Like learn some new stuff to take back to their communities. And
Right.
this year I did actually ask them, I'm like, what did you learn? Tell me more. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to just hear it was a good conference and like the dessert was amazing at lunchtime. Like, yes, it was, but also like, what did you take away from here that you're going to go do at home? And so I think we're trying to think through how we create more of those opportunities outside of just our normal major training events, right? So that we can make some of the trainings and that type of stuff more accessible to providers who may not have a travel budget, or even folks within an agency who maybe like off cycle on their, this is my year to come to conference year situation,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Is there anything else, you know, in NCHV, veteran homelessness, that you want our listeners to know? There'd be a lot.
You see me like filtering my thoughts.
How can I narrow it down?
You know, I do think in terms of your listeners, and this is something that I pitch at almost every general speech that I give, right? And it's, if you are someone who's a landlord, right? Like, give a veteran exiting homelessness a chance. If you're someone who's an employer, right? Like, you know, these veterans, even though they've experienced homelessness and may have spotty employment histories, are going to be among some of the most dedicated within your workforce because they're very motivated to do better for themselves. So if you're someone who's hiring, give them a chance, right? Like if you're someone who has the means to support organizations like HVAF or NCHV, like certainly do so, because this work never happens in a vacuum. And, you know, it is really hard, but worthwhile work. And, you know, even for folks who may not be landlords or job creators or whatever it is, right? Like there are so many ways to partner with organizations in your community that serve homeless veterans, right? Whether you're volunteering or running bingo night or serving meals or whatever it is, like there are so many opportunities to plug into this work. And if you're someone who cares, reach out and find out how to plug in. Because I think, you know, we at least at NCHV welcome nearly anybody, right? Like if you're interested in ending veteran homelessness, come on in and we'll find the spot for you to figure out how we can maximize your talents, your skills, your, you know, energy, right? In a way that is useful to the cause.
Yeah, how can our listeners connect with you, you know, online and follow along?
Yeah, well, so our website is www.nchv.org. I believe we are also on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram. And we may or may not be starting a TikTok by the end of the year.
Oh,
so
nice.
Look for more by the end of the year. Maybe not today, but there are like twinkles in my mind that we're going to do that. So
nice.
You know, there may be more to come.
Yeah, awesome. Well, they'll have to tune in and connect with you guys. So, well, thank you, Kathryn, so much for talking with us and sharing with our listeners more about NCHV.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time today.
All right. Today on Roger That, I am here with Steve Benz. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm super excited and delighted to see where all this goes. So thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for taking time to chat with us today. So first, if you just want to share a little bit about yourself so our listeners know who you are.
Sure. I'm Steve Benz. I live here in Indianapolis for about, I guess, the last 25 years, something like that. So, I spent many years working at Eli Lilly and Company, and then got hooked up with HVAF many years ago. I grew up in a small Wisconsin town, did some time in the Air Force, went off to college and then law school, and found my way to Lilly and found my way to HVAF.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, thank you for your service. Is there anything about your time in the military you want to share? Maybe when you served,
Sure.
where you went, what you did.
Yeah, I was in the United States Air Force from 1985 to 1991. I was what's called an air weapons controller. They're guys who sit at radar scopes and tell our guys where the other guys are and pass communications along, and did that in several different places. I was in a mobile radar unit over at Kadena Air Base in Japan, and had a lot of fun with that. Spent time in Korea, the Philippines. Did some of my work, those were back in the the Cold War days, and we had a lot of places that had radars that were looking at a lot of different things, and I spent time working on some of those, and some time up on the AWACS plane. We had the radar up on top of it, and so I did that for a while too, and spent 6 years. Had just a great time doing that. I have a daughter who's currently an officer in the United States Air Force.
Oh, nice.
First Lieutenant Olivia Benz, who's stationed at Yokota Air Base outside of Tokyo, Japan. She's already done a lot more and better things in the Air Force than I ever did. America's done better the second time around with this one of the Benz family. She's just a super officer, and we're totally proud of her being over there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So yeah, I always ask this question actually to the veterans that we serve, for our stories, for our blog and everything. I always ask them, what was the transition like from military life into back into the civilian world?
Well, I think for me, I got out of the Air Force. I went to law school, and the transition, you know, for the most part, went pretty smoothly for me. And because I had a period of time there where I was just back in school, and so everything was kind of structured as I was going through that. I think part of the transition though is after spending several years in the service, when you've had the opportunity to really do some great things, work with a lot of great people on things that are serious and important. For me, going back and being a student wasn't the easiest thing in the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very fortunate that I was able to get out of the service, go to school, get a good job afterwards. So, and kind of just build off a lot of those experiences that I had in the Air Force.
So you came here to work at Eli Lilly,
Right.
and so how then did you get connected with HVAF?
Sure. The way I got connected with HVAF was probably in the early 2000s, maybe 2002, 2003. Lilly had provided a grant to HVAF for what is now known, I guess, still as the Warman facility,
Mm-hmm.
and to create a lot of that place. And at the time, I was working as a lawyer at Lilly, and part of my job was to take a look at that grant paperwork, right? So I took a look at that paperwork, and then I was impressed with the organization, and so I got to meet people through that Lilly project. And at that point in time, then I decided to do some volunteer legal work for HVAV back in the early 2000s, and that's how I got started.
Yeah, and I know you've had, you've been able to be involved in multiple ways, on the board and yeah, and all that.
Yeah, it was great. I started off first doing the voluntary legal work, which was really interesting in that HVAV was very different back then.
Mm-hmm.
It was much smaller, not the organization it is today. Didn't have the resources it had today, and in some ways we were just kind of scratching and clawing to keep things going and pay the bills and work through a lot of different issues that were challenging. And I did that from the legal perspective, and then I joined the board, and I was on the board for a long time, and got to serve as the board chair for about 6 years. For a while, I was the chairman of the facilities committee when we actually purchased the building that we're sitting in today. Prior to that, we'd been out at the old RCA building out on New York Street, and then we came down here. That was one of the first, I guess, big projects that I worked on when I was at HVAC.
Yeah, being involved with us for so long, what has that been like just to see the growth and the change and everything?
It's been just a fascinating thing to watch, and in many regards, right? It's been really interesting to see the place get bigger, see the mission continue, see it kind of evolve, and it always seems we had the right people in place leading the organization at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know how that seems to work in life, but it always seems that when we really needed people who were, when it was a smaller organization, pinching pennies, really worrying about that, we had a CEO named Tony Rogers who was a board chair named Tony Rogers who was an incredible accounting finance mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was great for us at that time when we were really just trying to continue. And to look at the place today, I think a lot of times some people will think that it was inevitable that it would be here and it would be what it is today, and that's not true. I mean, there were times early on where we were just getting by, and a lot of people were doing a ton of work to help it get by.
Mm-hmm.
But then to watch it grow into what it is today, I think some of the things that have been fascinating to see was for many, many years, it was really focused almost exclusively on the grant and per diem program and what was called the REST program, and really kind of what I'll call the reintegration side of veteran homelessness, and that's helping people who are experiencing homelessness to come back in, to be reintegrated, to get back on their feet and go out. Watching it move to kind of the SSVF model and that point in time where really preventing homelessness became even more and more of the mission of the organization. That's fun to watch, to see how that part of it's grown today, and seeing a lot of the things such as the food pantry and the clothing, things that we did somewhat back in the day, but not to the extent that we do now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you were just serving as the board chair of National Coalition for Homeless Veterans, which HVAF is connected with. So how did you get involved with them?
Sure. I got involved originally and found out about NCHV through my time at HVAF. And I got to pay attention to what they were doing and see a lot of the work that they were doing in Washington. And part of my day job at Eli Lilly and Company, I spent a lot of time in Washington just for the work that I was doing for the company. And so when I was out there, I started to kind of meet some people and network with them a little bit and learn about what NCHV was doing. And I'd always spent some time working in kind of government affairs related issues, so that fascinated me. And then to be able to kind of start to do that for NCHV was really neat. And there was it kind of matched up really well that at a point in time where I had been the board chair here for about 6 years, and it was time for someone else to do that. And so when I stepped away from that, then I got more involved in the NCHV side of things and began that chapter. It's a very different kind of work. I mean, it is focused. It really has like a two-pronged mission to basically go ahead and be the voice of the homeless veteran service providers and homeless veterans in Washington. But also then it does a lot of work in training and helping institutions across the country implement programs. But all of it done at a much more, shall I say, 50,000-foot level versus the work that the service providers like HVAF are doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, how long were you the board chair?
I was the board chair for the last 3 years that I was there. I was there a total of 9 years. And one of the really great things about that role, it was so much fun, was I got to spend time seeing all the different organizations across the country that are working so hard to prevent veteran homelessness, and of all different sizes, from organizations such as U.S. Vets with serving thousands and thousands of veterans, to small places that might be having 3-4 beds for veterans, and trying to help that work across the whole country was just a fascinating challenge to be part of, and a great learning experience in meeting so many people who are so motivated to prevent veteran homelessness.
Yeah, are there any, initiatives that you led, any projects that, you're proud to share?
I think the thing that I am the most proud of that NCHV was able to accomplish, and to say I led it would probably be an overstatement. I was a part of it because of the great work that the board and the staff did. But NCHV does so many amazing things. I know you've had a chance to talk to Kathryn. They are a small but mighty team. The work that they do with literally a handful of people. It's probably been between 5 and 7 since I've been a part of it. Is just simply astounding. And the thing that they did, which was so amazing, was the work they did during COVID. At the same time, so many people were just trying to figure out, hey, what does this mean for me? How am I going to get through COVID? Is my organization going to get through COVID? All of that point in time, the work that they were able to do, the resources that they were able to obtain, literally in the billions with a B of dollars that they were able to pull together over a period of time, was just so critical to the services that were provided to homeless veterans throughout that period of time. All of the funds that helped people kind of retool their organizations to make them safe for people during the pandemic. Interestingly, a piece of trivia, the first virtual hearing that the United States Congress ever had.
Mhm.
The first speaker was Kathryn Monet of
Oh,
NCHV.
really?
She
Nice.
was the person when they were testing out to see if I could get all the kinks out of the system and
Yeah.
have a virtual hearing. She was the first one there, which I think is a testament to her and to NCHV and the significance of the issues. And I look back at what they did, and it was just something to see. And just a handful of people made such a big difference in the lives of thousands and thousands of others during the pandemic.
Yeah, being a veteran yourself and now seeing, the work that HVAF has done and NCHV and all these veterans now, not just in Indiana, but across the nation that have been helped. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's something to see. I think when you really, what I really enjoy is when you see the connectivity within the group of people that are really working on this issue. And that's every single person who's a part of it. That's the veteran that's going through the program.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the people who are doing the work that they're in this building. They're the people at NCHV. They're the volunteers that come in and support things. It's one of the best examples, if not maybe the best example, of what our society does in the United States and what it can do when it pulls together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has a common purpose, and it's something that if we could address so many issues the way we're able to kind of pull together and tackle this one, it'd be perhaps a better place. And so I really, that's something that I've seen. Now, one of the things that we are very focused on at NCHV is to make sure that the support for veterans continues as times change. One of the things that I've always worried a bit about is as the conflicts have wind down, there's a very small amount of people who have, and it's getting smaller and smaller, that have connections to the United States military. So we really have to continue to be out there, talk about veterans issues, and get as much of it solidified in statute and other places, because it's not always been an issue at the forefront of a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure that it remains that way as a smaller and smaller demographic of Americans actually participate and know folks in the military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, before we close out, is there anything else you want to share? Think our listeners should know about HVAF and NCHV? Just anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'd really like to share is no contribution is too small.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's financial, whether it's time, it all adds up. And lots of times I think, to the extent you also can participate and volunteer in person, I think the connectivity that brings to the people who are in this building and who work on these issues, both the veterans here, it's great to connect with them, the ones who are going through the program, but also the people who are on the staff. And so I would just say to people, if you're motivated in any way to play any kind of role, whether it's dropping stuff off for the food pantry or the clothing pantry, whether it's coming in and volunteering, whether it's spending a few dollars, making a donation, do it, because it's truly important, and it truly adds up over a period of time. And I think if you're like me, I got when I started volunteering for HVAV, I never realized how much I would actually get out of being a volunteer and connected to HVAV and NCHV. I got way more out of everybody there than I ever gave to them, right? And so I would just suggest to folks, and you don't have to be a former veteran yourself. You don't have to have had people who have served in the military. Some of the greatest volunteers and board members and supporters of HVAV were not veterans themselves. And so if you're motivated, you're interested, please just reach out to me, to anyone here at HVAV, at NCHV. We'd love to have you as part of the team.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Steve.
Well, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Keep doing all the great work you guys are.
Oh, yes, we will.
All right, that wraps up this episode of Roger That. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to Roger That on wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at HVAF of Indiana. And for even more stories on HVAF and the veterans that we serve, check out our blog on our website at hvaf.org. Thank you, and until no hero is homeless, we'll see you next time on Roger That, a podcast presented by HVAF of Indiana.